So tonight, our second class, we're going to look at what happens once the nutrients get into the blood. So in our last class, we looked at how the food on our plate, how it's broken down all the way down the gastrointestinal tract into tiny little particles and absorbed out of the gut and into the blood. And now it's in the blood. What happens to it now? Do you ever wonder? What happens to it now? Because what happens to it now has a lot to do with the pancreas. And a lot of pancreases aren't working well today. And when they're not working well, the person's given the diagnosis of diabetes. And I know in Australia there's 500 new diabetics diagnosed every day. Where's my resident why? Why? And remember, Proverbs 26 verse 2 says the curse causeless shall not happen. In other words, no diabetic happens without a cause. And last night we looked at how you can only blame genes for 5% of the problem. Sorry, no, that didn't come out right. Yes, that's right, that did come out right. Only 5%. Do you know, when I was, it must have been probably a year and a half ago now, I was being interviewed by an orthopaedic surgeon in London. He wanted an interview of me to put on his podcast. You see, that's what he was doing now because he's lost his job because he wouldn't take the shot. I actually believe medicine lost some of their best because they took a stand. He said, there's no safety studies on it. Why would I do that? But he said to me that no operating theatre would let him operate now as an orthopaedic surgeon. But he said, I have to tell you that I was getting more and more interested in health. It's one of the reasons I took the stand. But he said, I got to the point where I was only operating on 5% of my patients. He said, my colleagues, they operate on 50%. 5%? I said, really? That's impressive. What were you doing? He said, I was getting them to drink more water. I was getting them to start eating more nourishing food. And I would put them in touch with a physiotherapist. And the physiotherapist would show them how to strengthen their ligaments, strengthen their muscles. Because God designed the body not just with bone. All around the bone are the tendons, the ligaments, the muscles. And whenever there's a bone injury, you know those muscles and those ligaments and those tendons, they can actually compensate. And I've met people who have overcome serious back injuries by strengthening those muscles through nutrition, through hydration, and through exercise. I said, that's impressive. He said, I had a lady come in one day and she said, oh, can't you just operate? Choose your heart, is that right? Yeah. Choose your heart. So what we're going to look at when we look this evening at diabetes, we're going to go inside the cell. Because when you go inside the cell, it explains much. So the glucose, it's been broken down from the food that we're eating. And before we look at exactly what happens, I'm going to make a list of foods that have become very popular today. And I believe that these foods are a contributing factor in why diabetes has escalated to the levels that it is. Never in the history of mankind have human beings eaten so many carbohydrates. It's as if that they've taken carbohydrates from every country. You see, in all traditional foods, there's always a carbohydrate, but it's almost as if they've taken them all and lumped them all together. Let me show you. Bread, yes, bread is a very common carbohydrate. Although when I was in Fiji, I said to an elderly lady, you didn't eat bread as a child. She said, no, we didn't even know what bread was when I was a little girl. I said, what did you eat? She said, cassava. We just used to eat lumps of cassava like bread. She said our starches were cassava and sweet potato, breadfruit, taro. They didn't eat bread at all. But unfortunately in Fiji today, there's hot bread shops that are open till 11 o'clock at night. And when that lady was a little girl, there was no diabetes. But today, it's in very high amounts, just like in Australia and America. So bread is a big carbohydrate, cereal. And we know that people are high cereal consumers because there's a whole aisle devoted to it in the supermarket. And so many people are going to bed too late, and so they get up too late, and then they want a very quick breakfast if they have breakfast. Cereal goes into the bowl, milk goes on it, goes like wet tissue paper down the hatch in 10 minutes, out the door. But then it's not long before they're going to have something because it doesn't last them. That doesn't last them 3.5 to 4 hours. And the food actually is still in the stomach, but the brain says, there's nothing in there for me. And that's often a reason why people are being hungry all day. And so, I don't know where that came from. We'll go over a little bit. Cakes, biscuits, donuts, you call them cookies. Do you know in Australia we call cookies biscuits? So when we come to America and we see a sign, biscuits and gravy, we think, these Americans are strange people. That'd be like you having cookies and gravy, but your biscuit is like a bread roll, isn't it? A scone, we call a scone, you call it a scone, something like that. So I'm just going to say cakes, etc., because there's a whole range. We could just about fill the board of croissants and muffins and pies and pasties and etc., etc. Another carbohydrate is a pizza. I didn't even know what pizzas was when I was a little girl of the 50s and 60s, but I think everyone knows what pizza is today. Pasta, I also didn't know what pasta was, but it's a very common one today, especially in the fast food shops and especially in the aisles of the supermarket. There's almost a whole aisle just of pasta. Potatoes, and we call them chips, but I think you call them French fries, yeah? And then last and certainly least in nutritive value is the pure crystallised acid that's extracted from the sugarcane plant. There is another carb, which is rice, which is also a popular carbohydrate. So you see what I'm saying, that the carbohydrates from all the different countries seems to be lumped together, and so many people today are eating this high carbohydrate diet. And there's nothing wrong with carbohydrates. Carbohydrates aren't bad. It's only when they're overdone and refined. And I don't think anyone chose to eat this way. It's just there, it's just quick, it's just fast. And you know, the worst time to plan your lunch is 5 minutes before lunchtime. The worst time to think about food is when you're hungry. So at breakfast, we should be thinking about lunch, because hunger is the strongest urge in the body. The strongest urge overtakes every other urge. And so when the person is hungry, it's like, get out of their way. They're just going to eat anything they can get their hands on. Now, all of these foods break down in the gastrointestinal tract to a singular structure called glucose. And glucose is the main fuel used by every cell in the body. And so the glucose gets broken down is the gut, as we saw, and then it's absorbed out of the gut and into the blood. Then it goes straight to the liver, and the liver is the project manager. The liver determines where it goes. And the first place it goes is to the cell. And it comes into the cell, under the action of insulin. So let's draw the pancreas. As we just saw, the pancreas plays a very important role in digestion. Most people are surprised at how it's the pancreas that is the number one organ of digestion. It finalises everything. And before I studied the gastrointestinal tract, I thought the stomach broke down all the food, but it doesn't. It's only protein, and even then it's only partially protein because the Trypsin brothers do the rest, don't they? You know all about it now. And so the pancreas, yes, it releases the digestive enzymes that we just looked at, but the pancreas also releases 2 hormones into the blood. These digestive enzymes are released into the gut, but the pancreas also releases 2 hormones that are released into the blood. One is insulin. And insulin's the hormone that's designed to get blood sugar levels down. The other hormone is glucagon. And glucagon is the hormone that gets the blood sugar levels up. And these 2 hormones work together to balance blood sugar levels. And they work very well in my body because my blood sugar levels are like this all the time. I never take my blood, I never test my blood sugar levels, I never take any test because everything works. But something has happened to cause a disruption in these 2 hormones, because if the pancreas is working well, they do a great job at consistently balancing our blood glucose levels. So let's have a look at how the glucose gets into the cell. It gets in under the action of insulin. Insulin's the key that unlocks the door to get the glucose into the cell. And when the glucose goes into the cell, we touched on this last night, it goes through a 20-step pathway. And that 20-step pathway delivers to us 2 units of energy. That's why we eat, to break down food, to get it into the blood, to get it into the cell. The end result of the 20-step pathway is a chemical form of glucose called pyruvate. And pyruvate, as the chemical form of glucose, gets fed into what's often called the powerhouse of the cell. It's called the powerhouse of the cell because even though it's only an 8-step pathway, it delivers 36 units of energy. What a difference. What makes the difference? Oxygen. What a difference oxygen makes. How are you going to feel if every single one of your 75 trillion cells has enough oxygen to deliver that much energy? You're going to be jumping out of your skin with energy. Sounds good? But on this high carbohydrate diet, we have still got glucose left over. And so now it's stored. And it's stored in little molecules of glucose, and it's called glycogen. Glycogen is a name given to quick-release glucose stores. They're already sitting, glycogen, they're already sitting in your muscle cell. And that's why I told you yesterday I had breakfast like a king, I had lunch like a queen, and I didn't eat again till the next morning. Now I woke up at 5:30 this morning, as is usual time. And at 6 o'clock, we go walking, and there's a really good hill where I'm staying, so we get a really good workout. How did I get the energy? I hadn't eaten since 2 o'clock the day before. Where did I get the energy to get up the hill? It was my glycogen stores. They're already sitting in your muscle cell, just waiting to be called on. And by the way, it can only be used by your muscle cell. But the good news is your liver has a little bit of glycogen too, and that can be sent everywhere. And so as I walked this morning, my glycogen was plucked. Glycogen was plucked, especially when we're walking hard up that big hill. No need to even run up this hill. You get really high intensity. Or my glycogen's getting plucked. It's a wonderful process. Psalm 139 verse 14, the Bible says, I will praise you, I'm fearfully, wonderfully made, marvellous are thy works, and that my soul knoweth right well. And that psalmist didn't know what I'm showing you here. Did you know that Darwin's theory rested on what they would find on the inside workings of the cell? Do you know what that means? His theory is refuted. Because there's a literal city inside there. Yesterday we had a look at what's happening in cancer. Today we're having a look at exactly what your liver does with the glucose that gets sent to the cell. Only so much can go through the energy cycles, then some is stored. But on a high carbohydrate diet, we've still got glucose left over. And so now that glucose is stored in the most amazing fuel depot in the human body. It's called fat. I've just given you the basic science there. Can you see that fat doesn't make you fat? It's this high carbohydrate diet releasing too much glucose, forcing the body, yes, some through the cell, some as glycogen. Wow, that's full. Where else? There's nowhere else. It gets stored as fat. And what's happening to Australians, Americans today on this high carbohydrate diet? They're getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. Did you know Australians overtaken you guys? 68% of Australians either overweight or obese on this high carbohydrate diet. And what if people have been told for the last 30 years, stop eating the fat? Did that work? No, that's when Alzheimer's came up, because the fattiest organ in the body is the brain. No, that hasn't worked at all. And what's the definition of insanity? To do what you've always done and expect different results. But it's also caused something else. It's a big contributing factor to the diabetes that we are seeing. But something else has come into the equation. There's no doubt about it, this refined sugar gets the blood sugar level up too high and too fast. So there's no doubt about it. There was no diabetes on the planet till sugar was refined and established in a nation. But something else has come along, and it's a grain. And it's the grain that you'll find in bread, majority of breads, cereals, the majority of all the cakes, the donuts, etc., biscuits, cookies, etc., pizza, pasta. It's the grain that is made out of, or the grain that is used to make these very common popular foods, and that is wheat. So what happened to the wheat? The wheat was hybridised. It was hybridised in the 1950s. There's a very interesting book. There's a few books that talk about it, but one, probably the most famous, is Wheat Belly by Dr. William Davis. And he gives the story of what happened to the wheat. In the 1950s, it went through intensive crossbreeding under a Dr. Bulag and his team in Mexico. And they wanted to produce a plant with a high yield of grain to help with the starvation crisis in India, in Mexico. And so they put the wheat through intensive crossbreeding. Now, at first, they produced a wheat with a high yield of grain, but because it grew that high, before the grain could be harvested, the stalk broke. So they went back to the drawing board, and now you'll notice any wheat that's grown, it only grows 2 foot high and it has a thick stem, because it now produces 6 to 8 times more grain per plant. So a Nobel Prize was given to Dr. Norman Bulag in 1976. Look at the time frame. By the end of the 1970s, that wheat's going worldwide. And the farmers loved it. They're getting 6 to 8 times more grain per acre. That's 6 to 8 times more money. They've got to pay their bills. So you look at the timeline. By the 1990s, every bread, cereal, cakes, pizza, pasta is made out of the hybridised wheat. It was rushed through with no safety studies. Sound familiar? Yeah. Rushed, yeah. Aren't we happy about Robert Kennedy Jr. coming to the forefront? I hear he's even going to get fluoride out of your water. That's pretty good. Don't know how they ever got it in. And so back to where we are, the hybridised wheat. Now you'll notice that today gluten intolerance, celiac, it's in quite large proportions, never heard of before the hybridised wheat. So the protein or the gluten structure was changed. But what I particularly want to show you today is what it did to the starch structure. What the hybridisation did to the starch structure is it created a starch called amylopectin A. Amylopectin A is the starch that was created in the hybridisation process. So let's draw a line of person's energy. They have the wheat bread with amylopectin A, gets the blood sugar level up very high, very fast, and then you've always got that corresponding drop. That's amylopectin A. Let me give you something to compare it to, which is amylopectin B. Amylopectin B is found in bananas and potatoes, and if you're familiar with the glycemic index of foods, bananas and potatoes can get the blood sugar level up fairly high, fairly fast. See, with the glycemic index, it's an index or a reading on how quickly the glucose in that food gets released into the blood. So banana is quite high, cherries are quite low. So how come? What's the difference? With the naked eye, you can see no real difference, but under a microscope, in a banana, the starch structure is quite loose, so the glucose is released quickly. But in the cherry, the starch structure is tight, so it slowly releases the glucose. Now, for the diabetic whose pancreas isn't working as well as it should, that can make a huge difference just going to low glycemic foods. So let's see where amylopectin B, which is in bananas and potatoes, where does that sit on the blood sugar chart? It gets fairly high and fairly low, not as fast and not as high and not as low, the amylopectin B. So it's the green one. So amylopectin C. Amylopectin C is found in chickpeas, lima beans, you call them garbanzos, the chickpeas, lentils, black-eyed peas, cannelloni, kidney, all your legumes or beans. They give a lovely steady rise, maintenance, lovely steady drop. That's amylopectin C. Every cell in our body wants that. In fact, our cells run very well on a steady, consistent delivery of fuel. So you can see that the refined sugar and the products made with wheat are getting these quick highs and so corresponding dumps. Because when blood sugar goes up very high, then the brain says to the pancreas, quick, insulin. So a lot of insulin is released to deal with the problem, but too much insulin's released. So then it drops down. Now we get hypoglycemia, too low. So when it's down there, the brain says to the pancreas, stop the insulin, release the glucagon. Remember, that's the hormone to get it up again. But when the person's down there, what do they usually do? Grab for a candy, grab for a cup of coffee with 3 teaspoons of sugar, grab for a sugar soda drink. Will that get it up? Oh, yes. But now it goes too high again. So this constant whiplash of up, down, that is wearing pancreases out. But something happens before the pancreas works out. Or insulin resistance is developed on the cell. It's almost as if the cell says, I'm sick of the sight of you. Leave us alone. So you get insulin resistance on the cell. And so the glucose remains in the blood, and the brain sees it, and it says to the pancreas, more insulin, but it doesn't need more insulin. We've already got enough insulin, it just can't get into the cell. So it's got to do something with all this excess glucose, so it spills out into the urine. Diabetes mellitus means sweet urine. So you've got insulin resistance happening. By the way, what's happening back in the pancreas? It was getting screamed at all day. So it eventually just says, I'm done. I'm not playing this game anymore. So what I wanted to show you is with this, I think I missed a page there. There it is that it's not just the refined sugar, but it is also the wheat. So let's have a look at where it sits on the glycemic index. So glycemic index, baseline is considered 55. So anything with a reading under 55 is considered low GI. So that's great food for the diabetic because it's slow, consistent release, steady release of glucose. Anything high, it's releasing the glucose too fast. And when the pancreas isn't working well, it doesn't respond well to the quick highs and lows. So cherries. Cherries sit at 26. So great fruit for diabetics. And that's not just cherries, that's strawberries, blueberries, blackberries, raspberries, all your berries sit at about this. Grapefruit. Grapefruit sits at 25, and that's not a surprise because it's not a very sweet fruit. Where does sugar fit? Now this is whether it's white or tan or brown, got that? It sits at 59, and that's not a real surprise. But what is a surprise is the white. When I say white, I'm talking about white bread, all the white wheats, so white pasta. It sits at 69. All because of this amylopectin A. But what's really shocking, I'm glad you're sitting down because what I'm about to tell you is shocking. Whole wheat. Got that? Whole wheat? The whole wheat, 72. How could that be? How it could be is because the whole wheat is not refined, and because it's not refined, it's got more amylopectin A in it, and it's the amylopectin A that gets that shoot up in blood sugar levels. I was explaining this at one of our retreats a few years ago, and a lady began to cry. I said, "Why are you crying?" She said, "I'm 69. I was diagnosed with diabetes when I was 65. I do everything they tell me. I have whole wheat bread, whole wheat pasta, whole wheat. And she said, and every 6 months I go to the doctor and he puts me on more insulin. And what's the definition of insanity? Do what you've always done and expect different results. She said, I'm crying because I've been so frustrated. But she said, I'm crying because I'm so happy you have just solved the puzzle. So why aren't nutritionists telling diabetics this? Well, we haven't got time to go there, have we? How much wheat does America grow? How much wheat does Australia grow? You know, this is a difficult one because, you know, there are farmers and it's their livelihood. And if they go back to the ancient grain that's not hybridised, which is the Enken corn, the spelt, the old ancient grains, they're going to go back to a plant that's not going to give near as much grain per acre. So I really feel for them. So how can we conquer diabetes? I'm going to take you through the Sustain Me principles. And in the Sustain Me principles, the first S is sunshine. The ultraviolet rays from the sun, UVB rays particularly, hit the skin, and they convert a form of cholesterol just under the skin. Got that? We need our cholesterol because it's converted to vitamin D. And vitamin D is essential for the proper functioning of every single organ, and the pancreas is no different. So we need the sunshine. We need it every day. If you put sunscreen on your skin, you will get no UVB rays, which means it'll reduce your body's ability to make the vitamin D. Now, regarding exposure to sunshine, this is where you've got to waken up your common sense. Got that? When I go on holidays, it does happen sometimes, and I lie out in the sun, I don't put sunscreen on. I take this thing on my wrist that's called Watch. 15 minutes front, 15 minutes back, under the umbrella. And I don't get burnt. If I had dark skin, I could probably go half an hour front, half an hour back and under the umbrella. That's why you're the doctor. You know how much sunshine your body needs, and our body needs sunshine. Traditionally, people were working outside all through the winter, getting bits of sun. Then the spring comes, getting a bit more sun. So by the middle of summer, they had a tan. And they had a UVB tan, and a UVB tan is a lasting tan. Have you seen how long the names are on the sunscreen packet? And do you know that since sunscreen's been used, skin cancer has not reduced? And what's the definition of insanity? To do what you've always done, expect different results. Do you know what they're finding now? That vitamin D deficiency is contributing to skin cancer. Because we need that sun. Use of water. We need to be drinking at least 8 glasses of water a day. Insulin and glucagon, the 2 hormones that are used to balance your blood sugar levels, they're made up mostly of water. And if you're dehydrated, your pancreas is not going to be able to make the water that it needs to make to produce those hormones. We need to be having 8-ounce glasses a day. If you're not having that much water, start to increase it. And the best way is little by little by little by little. This is what I do. I wake up in the morning, I have half a glass of water. I go to the bathroom, I have half a glass of water. I pray, I have another half glass of water. I get dressed, I have another half a glass of water. See what I'm doing? You spread it out. Now I don't know. That's a plant, yes. Sorry, I thought it might be plastic. Now, if that plant was drooping, we'd know it'd be dry. And if we put 16 ounces of water in, it'd be all over the carpet, isn't that true? But if it's bone dry and I put a little bit in, a few minutes later another little bit, a few minutes later another little bit, within maybe 15 minutes I can get 16 ounces in there and it hasn't all run out the bottom. Same with the human body. You drink 16 ounces of water all at once, it's not long before you're going to be looking for the little house, or that's what we call it in Australia. You call it the bathroom, is that right? I travel a lot and I'm on the plane a lot and I don't want to be visiting the bathroom every 20 minutes, half an hour. So I just sip. I have a bit here, I have a bit there, and it's amazing how much water you can get into your body just by little, by little, by little, by little. Our body can handle it so much better when we have it little by little. When you go to bed tonight, please go to bed with a glass of water next to your bed. And the first thing you do when you wake up is water. Then you pray. Your pancreas needs the water to make the hormones to balance your blood sugar levels. Sleep. Let me give you God's perfect mathematical formula. 8 hours to work, 8 hours to play, 8 hours to, you can finish it, sleep. It must be 8. If you're not getting 8, I've got some good news, and on Saturday morning, I'll be showing you how you can rewire your brain. You can rewire your brain back into sleep. Now, if you want to go into this in detail, I don't want you to stay up until midnight reading this. But there's a whole chapter on sleep in my book, Sustain Me. And it shows how you can little by little increase your sleep, especially the hours before midnight. Please try for at least 2 hours before midnight, because remember I spoke about melatonin and the release by your microorganisms. but that hormone is released predominantly between the hours of 9 and 2. So 9 p.m. and 2 a.m. is when melatonin is released in the highest amounts, and melatonin is called the fix and rejuvenate nighttime hormone. So for your pancreas to revive and restore, you must grab that melatonin every night. So we're going to finish in time, unless you're 2 hours away. We're going to try and finish so you can get home and be in bed and get those hours of power. So we need 8 hours a night. If you're not getting 8, I've got some good news. You can start to train yourself back into those 8 hours. Trust in God. This takes into consideration all the emotional and mental aspects of disease. And in 1 Thessalonians 5:18, the Bible says, "In everything give thanks, for this is the will of God in Christ Jesus concerning you." Thank you so much, Father in heaven, that I've got diabetes. It's not easy to be thankful for it, but when we thank God for what we have and who we are, it's actually the first step to starting to recover from it. And what the research is now showing is when you picture your body free of diabetes and working well, and if you picture your pancreas starting to work well, it actually responds, because the mind and the body connection is very, very close. So be very thankful, and remember what trust is. Trust and faith are very similar, and faith is the substance of things hoped for. It's the evidence of things not seen. You're not there yet, but you're getting there. My daughter Emma, when she was 5, she said to me, "Mum, I'm going to grow up in a minute." Now, she didn't grow up in a minute. It took her another 10 years. What faith? That's the faith we should have. I'm going to be better in a minute. This pancreas is going to start working in a minute. We're getting there. We're a work in progress. Abstain. There are some things that must stop if you want your pancreas to revive and restore. And what must stop is the refined sugar. When someone has diabetes, until their pancreas is working well, they can't even handle honey or maple syrup, even the concentrated sugars, because the pancreas is not working well. So the refined sugar must stop, and wheat. And I've showed you the reasons why. But you can get some very nice breads today made out of spelt. Spelt is probably more common than the Enkenhorn or the Emmer, E-M-M-E-R. That's another of the ancient grains. When you see ancient grains, it's usually the unhybridized. Or you can also Google Simple Needs, the sourdough gluten-free bread. It's a very nice bread. And a lot of Whole Foods. I think they've even got a contract with Target now. So just have a look around and that bread will keep in your fridge for 6 weeks. And when you put it in the toaster, it lightens up. Even after 5 weeks, it lightens up. So there are some things that must stop if you want to conquer diabetes, and what you have to abstain from is caffeine. So why caffeine? Yes. I did hear that. What? There was a guy at our health retreat, and every time I mentioned caffeine, he'd groan. "Oh no, here she goes again. Why caffeine? Yeah. You better have a good reason for saying this. When a person takes a cup of coffee, the effect on their body is a crisis. And with the crisis, you've got a disruption of your neurotransmitters in the brain. And in a crisis, you need energy and you need it quickly. So in a crisis, you get a release of insulin to get more glucose into the blood, because you're about to into the cell, because you're about to do the run or the climb or the fight of your life. But there's no crisis. And so very quickly, the pancreas has to keep adjusting. So you put coffee on top of all of these, you've got a double whammy effect of just wearing that pancreas out. There's a book called Caffeine Blues. It's by, I think his name's Kachansky, and his subtitle is Wake Up to One of Americans' Hidden Drugs. Drugs meaning it's highly addictive. And people say to me, drink coffee. I say, no, I just watch the people suffer. Day one, Misty Mountain Health Retreat. They're miserable. Because that caffeine, it causes a disruption in the neurotransmitters. And when you're constantly taking coffee, and this disruption's constantly taking place, when the coffee stops, then the blood increases to the brain and you get these terrible headaches. That's why if you're a coffee drinker, please don't stop. Ease off it. Or you won't be able to come tomorrow night. You'll be suffering so much. And so that's what it does. It has effect on the pancreas. What also must be abstained is the high glycemic index foods. It's not hard to get a glycemic index chart and concentrate on those. Inhale through the nose. In Genesis 2 verse 7, the Bible says, God formed man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. He became a living soul. This was not mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. God breathed into nostrils. There's a message there. You see, our nose purifies the air, humidifies the air, warms the air, balances blood gases, and tomorrow when we look at the heart, I'm going to show you how those blood gases help to control blood pressure. Isn't that incredible? Just from nose breathing. And it also, nose pressurizes the air, making it perfect for the lungs. Mouth does not do that. In fact, I was reading a report of some dentists saying that cavities in the mouth are largely a result of mouth breathing because you're breathing in dirty air. Now, the hardest time is when you get to the top of that steep hill. But I've trained myself only to nose breathe. You won't think you can do it, but you can. You won't die. One lady said to my husband one day when she wanted to book into the health retreat, she was worried. She said, Michael, what if I wake up dead? Anyway, it's our standing joke now. What if you wake up dead? Now, in the middle of the night, you don't know if you're nose breathing. So there's a simple thing you can do to ensure it. Tape up your mouth. You won't die. And you won't wake up dead. Now, one civilised way to do it is to just put the tape from underneath your nose to your chin for an hour a day. And then there's a pathway in your brain that's getting used to it, and then you can sleep with it after you've done that for 7 days. So my granddaughter, Sophia, when she was 8, she stayed with me last year in holiday, and she said, Nana, I've got a cold. Give me some tape. I've got to sleep with my mouth taped up. She said, just give me masking tape. And well, the masking tape. Went to sleep. She's my son's daughter. Obviously my son has taught her this, but she has proved that if she's a bit stuffy on her nose, she tapes her mouth up and it clears her nose. Isn't that incredible? Our body will go to great lengths to keep us alive, even when our mouth's taped up. But it is a way to train yourself back into nose breathing. It's important with breathing that it be a very relaxed affair. And it be mostly with our abdominal muscles and nose. We will get more oxygen. And what that means is this cell that I have drawn and showed you that when oxygen is in that cell, we've got 36 times we've got 36 units of energy. That's 18 times more energy because of the presence of oxygen. And that pancreas there is made up of these cells. So when we're getting more oxygen into the body, that pancreas... Oh, sorry, I thought I had the whiteboard for a minute there. That's better. That pancreas becomes happy. In fact, keeping all of these will ensure a happier pancreas. Nutrition. So the nutrition we have looked at, and we looked at in our last lecture, the 3 essential food groups. The 3 essential food groups are fibre. We looked at how fibre is necessary to slowly release the nutrients, the glucose, and that's important with diabetes. Fibre also sweeps the colon and stimulates peristalsis through the colon so that your colon is working better. And fibre also feeds your microorganisms that live in your gastrointestinal tract. Fibre's given a name today called prebiotics. You've heard of prebiotics? That's insoluble fibre. So that feeds the microorganisms in our gut. Protein is an essential nutrient. One of the reasons protein is an essential nutrient, this is the wall of the cell, and 50% of that membrane is protein. The building blocks in our body are made up of protein. Protein is an essential nutrient. And the cleanest burning fuels are your plant-based protein because they are a more alkaline protein. So the proteins that I eat are legumes, so chickpeas, lima beans, black-eyed beans, cannellini beans, and nuts and seeds. So the breakfast that I had this morning, I was given some oranges from California. They were remarkable. Maybe not the best for the diabetic. Maybe they're better to go to grapefruit, but I had apple, and that was delicious. Now that's low GI, great for the diabetic. I had chia seed and almonds and Brazil nuts, and then I had a slice of sourdough spelt toast with olive oil and cayenne pepper and avocado and black-eyed beans. Now, I was not hungry for 5 to 6 hours on that breakfast. That's an excellent breakfast for a diabetic. Because what that will do is that's high in fibre, great proteins and fats, olive oil on my bread, the avocado, the nuts and seeds. And what those foods do, they give a steady, sure, consistent delivery of fuel, which is what every cell in the body wants, which is what the pancreas wants. Now, it might surprise you to know that the non-essential food group, do you know what that means? It means we can actually function without it, is carbohydrates. Now, that's a surprise to so many people, especially when you consider that many people today, many people today are eating a diet that is high in the non-essential and low in the 3 essentials, especially when it's refined and overdone, which many people are doing today, not even realising what this diet's doing for them. As I mentioned before, I don't think anyone chose to eat that way. I think it's just happened because it's such a fast society and it's just there. But you can live very well without carbohydrates. Carbohydrates aren't bad. And if I said no rice in Asia, I'd be thrown out of Asia. And if I said no potatoes when I'm in Ireland, I'd be thrown out of Ireland, and I would not have a very happy husband if the potatoes stopped. So as I mentioned previous, it's not that potatoes are bad, it's not that the carbohydrates are bad, they're just overdone. That's the problem, they're overdone. Every country has carbohydrate as part of their diet, yeah. And raising 8 children especially those growing boys, we always had carbohydrates as part of the meal. But we also had fibre, protein and fats. It can be part of the diet. The problem is when it's the only diet. In Genesis 1:29, God said to Adam and Eve, "Behold, I've given you every herb-bearing seed." What's a herb-bearing seed? That's your grain, that's your legume, that's your seed. And every tree, and the which of the trees a fruit-bearing seed, that's your nut. So these foods are high in fibre, proteins and fats. And then God said, "To you it shall be for meat." So the seed is for the meat. It's in the seed, it's like the chicken's egg. It's got everything that we need, high in fibre, generous protein, great fats, and 50% of the membrane around every cell in the body is fat. Another reason why it's an essential nutrient, whether you're 100-pound or 300-pound, this is the membrane around every cell in the body. God didn't say to Adam and Eve, "Behold, I've given you wheat." He said, "Behold, I've given you every herb-bearing seed." There are so many different grains and so many different legumes and so many different seeds and nuts. But in this high carbohydrate diet that we looked at, it's predominantly wheat. And the wheat's been hybridised. And so it's overdoing it that the problem arises. So people say to me, "Barbara, do you eat wheat?" I say, "Yes, but not much." But if I had diabetes, I wouldn't touch it, because of the way it gets those blood sugar levels up high so fast. So looking at nutrition, we need to concentrate on those 3 essential food groups. And moderation. We're to the me now. This is sustain. Moderation in all the good things. Don't overdo the sun. Don't overdo the food. We looked at in our last lecture, poor old stomach just can't handle it when you overdo it. And with moderation, breakfast like a king, lunch like a queen. And if you do eat at night, it should be in great moderation. It's like this. It's like going on a journey. You put a little bit of petrol in the car, and then half an hour later, a little bit more. Every half hour, a little bit more, a little bit more. Get to the end of your journey, and you call it a gas station. I'm not sure why, because they serve petrol. We call ours petrol stations. Go to the gas station, fill it up with petrol, and go and park in the garage. How much sense does that make? But that's what so many people are doing. Have a little bit here, have a little bit of there, a little bit there, a little bit there. Get to the end of the day, have their large meal and go to bed. It doesn't make any sense at all. Now, I think that most people have not even thought about this. It's just convenient. They're so busy, they haven't got time to think about it. It just happens. The last one is exercise. And exercise can do remarkable things with diabetes. And the exercise that does remarkable things is the high-intensity interval training. And as the name implies, the high-intensity interval training is intervals of high intensity and intervals of recovery. So where I'm staying in Coeur d'Alene, up in the hills, it's very easy to do, because everywhere you walk, you're going up and down and up and down. And it's the same where I live at Misty Mountain. It's very easy because it's up, down, up, down. But if you don't live in the hills, you can run. So it's periods of run. So high intensity is usually about 30 seconds. And then recovery is usually maybe 2 minutes, and then it's done for a cycle. And that's usually done for a cycle of 6. So what does that equal? I think it's about 15 minutes, is that right? We've got 24 hours in the day. If you haven't got 15 minutes to do the high intensity interval training, it's time to assess your time. And Ecclesiastes chapter 3 says, to everything there is a season and a time for every purpose under heaven. Got that? There is a time for exercise. It's the best insurance policy that you can make. It's just one short little crop in the day. And you can reverse insulin resistance in a week. How can you do that? Get the carbohydrates down, get the fibre, protein and fats up, and implement the high-intensity interval training. Because what happens with the high-intensity interval training is that this cell is now moving, and it's moving very fast. And tomorrow when we look at the heart, I'm going to show you in detail how the high intensity affects the cell. But enough to know now, this is starting to move so fast, it needs more fuel, so it develops extra insulin receptor sites on the membrane of the cell. Remember what insulin resistant is? Resisting the insulin. So you get the carbohydrates down. Doesn't mean you have to stop. Instead of having a whole plate of potatoes, you just have one. And then have lentils, and then a big salad, and avocado, and nuts and seeds. There's a variety. You just don't have them all together. Try and just have one carbohydrate at a meal. Aren't legumes high in carbohydrates? Actually, they're not. They're medium to low in carbohydrates. It's the grains that are high. So once you get the carbs down and increase the fibre, proteins and fats, start drinking adequate water, start the high-intensity interval training, your cell develops extra insulin receptor sites, and you can turn that insulin resistance around very quickly. Most high-intensity interval training research has been done on the exercise bike. So it can be done push-ups, 20 squats a day. Push-ups, you can alternate your high intensities. Rowing machine, but have little periods of rest. And that high intensity is what increases those insulin receptor sites. So it's a powerful thing to do. So I want to tell you the story before we go over to questions. We're going to do some questions tonight. We've got many cards there. So let me tell you the story of Dan. Dan came to us at the age of 19. He developed type 1 diabetes. I haven't made a difference between type 2 and type 1 because the same principles will heal them. How long will it take? I cannot tell. It depends on the age, depends on how serious it is, depends on how damaged the pancreas, depends on how diligent the person is to do what you've got to do. So he came to us, he was on 90 units of insulin a day, and he developed type 1 diabetes at the age of 15 after a course of very strong antibiotics for a chest cold. And the doctor told him that the antibiotics had killed the beta cells in his pancreas that make insulin. He said to me, my doctor told me my pancreas is dead. I said, is it gangrene? What's dead? If blood's going through that pancreas, I'd like to suggest it's alive. It just needs the right conditions. And he started the juicing program, and within 48 hours, he was getting blood sugar level lows. Why? He's on too much insulin. See, what that insulin allowed him to do was eat this. And now that he wasn't having that, he was basically on too much. And the first week, the first 3 days, if he got a blood sugar level low in the middle of the night, he'd take a candy. That'd get it up real quick to the point that it would give him a headache. So after a few days, he felt a bit guilty. So he decided if he got it again, he'd have an apple. Now, it takes a while to eat an apple in the middle of the night. But that apple juice would get it up. But he didn't get the headache. Third week, if he got a blood sugar level low, he'd get out of bed, jump on the floor, do 30 push-ups. And that would get his blood sugar level up. Glycogen stores. And if they're running out, then the body's going to go to the fat stores. And remember the liver's glycogen can go all through the body and all through the blood. Yeah. Do you know what he said to me on the 3rd week? Why didn't anyone tell me about glycogen? Best kept secret. Already sitting in your muscle cell, just waiting to be used. By the end of the 3rd week, he was taking 10 units of insulin a day. Type 1 diabetic. Was his pancreas dead? No, it wasn't dead at all. The fact that his blood sugar kept going down, 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 that was a clear indication that his pancreas is starting to work. You see, I don't spoon feed people. I give the principles and I'll leave it with them. And every morning he was up there running up and down hills, come back, take his blood sugar. He'd say to me, I haven't eaten anything and my blood sugar levels have come up. It was his glycogen stores and his fat stores. What an incredible body we live in. He is one of several type 1 diabetics that I have seen conquer their diabetes. How did they conquer their diabetes? Through implementing the Sustain Me principles. How simple is that? One lady told me, Barbara, I've just seen on YouTube you said to buy this tablet and your diabetes will be conquered in a week. Have you seen this one? Must have been AI. Have you heard me mention a tablet tonight? She tried to order the tablet and her bank said it's a scam and wouldn't release it. So she tried another card. They said $59. By the time she got it, they charged her $300. She had the tablets assessed and they were sugar tablets. So please, you will never hear me push a product. What you will hear me push is this incredible body that's got an inbuilt ability to heal itself when you give it the right conditions. Everything we need, we've got. We just need to know how to access it. And one thing that helps between meals is hydration. But what also adds to it is the whole salt. And the whole salt that we use is the Celtic salt. Another really good one is Baja salt. These salts have 82 minerals in them. And taking one little crystal, even the size of a sesame seed, before each meal, before each glass of water, on the meal, on the potato, on the avocado, but taking one crystal the size of a sesame seed before you begin each glass of water helps to maintain the blood sugar levels. And you know what they're saying now, the time-restricted eating, remember I mentioned time-restricted eating in the last class? The time-restricted eating twice in a 24-hour period, 6 hours apart, that is managing blood sugar levels and helping people to conquer diabetes. And what have the diabetics been told for the last 30 years? Eat every 2 hours. Did it work? No. But this is working. So it's not an absolute and it must be 2 meals. As I said, my boys get up early, they have an early breakfast, so they have lunch at 12, so they have something else at night. Just as long as if you do eat at night, just make it the lightest meal of the day. So that's the good news, is diabetes can be conquered. And these principles are outlined in detail in my book, Sustain Me. So I'll have a look at some questions now. Thank you. First question is, best way to recover from chemotherapy? One of the best ways to recover from chemotherapy is the green drinks. And you can buy barley green powders. They're freeze-dried powders, and taking a teaspoon and a little bit of water, squeeze a lemon, makes it a bit more palatable. But that green barley has the ability to cleanse the blood and the tissues. How to get the right minerals and vitamins by eating organic food. And as I showed you in the last lecture, ensuring that your digestion is working well so that you're getting the nutrients out of your food. Do you know there are some people who are eating organic food but their digestion is shot because they're eating all day long and they're spending good money, as you know, on the organic foods, but they're not accessing what they need, all because the digestion's not working well. So it is one thing to eat organic food, to eat the best quality that you can, but it is also another thing to ensure that your digestion is working well by drinking between meals, eating most of your food at breakfast and lunch, and also by going to bed early. What can Eve, sorry, it's good if you write clear. I've got what can E and A detox? What does that say?
Fix a 40-day cycle for.
Pardon?
What can fix a 40-day
Fix.
cycle?
Uh-huh. Okay, I think we're talking about the hormones here. So tomorrow, the first lecture, I think it's called From Prostate to Menopause, is that right? So we're talking about hormones tomorrow night, and we're going to be talking about the wild yam cream, which can help to balance the hormones. If a menopausal woman has 5 centimetre thickened uterus, how can that be thinned naturally so it won't turn cancerous? Now, I imagine the person has had a scan, and that's how they know that it's thickened, and you would not know if you hadn't had the scan. And I wouldn't be surprised if that person's been told that it could develop into cancer. I don't believe that. It will only develop if the conditions are right for cancer to develop. But I imagine the person's had a scan because maybe they've got pain or heavy bleeding, and they are both indications that the hormones are out of balance. So tomorrow night we'll be talking about how you can balance the hormones. If you can't be here tomorrow night, in my book Sustain Me, I have a chapter on hormones. What are your thoughts on colloidal silver and on red light therapy? I think colloidal silver has a place. It was used extensively before antibiotics, and it inhibits the oxygen uptake of one-celled omegas. So it can certainly knock out bacteria, but then you want to look at, well, why is the bacteria there? Personally, I don't use it, but I don't use much at all other than the food that I eat and the Sustain Me principles. Red light therapy can be effective. What about methylene blue? I don't know what I'm not sure what that is. How to heal lichen sclerosis. Do you know what lichen is? It's a fungus. And unfortunately, lichen sclerosis manifests itself often in a lady's genitals. And so it's very, very important. Yeah, please, in so much pain. In my book, Sustain Me, there's a chapter on hydrotherapy, sitting in alternating hot and cold baths. Hopefully the lady's the size of me, so you can easily sit in the hot and cold baths. If the lady is a little larger, she could sit in a hot bath, and then after 3 minutes she can get up and she can just put a very ice cold wet towel in that area between her legs. So those simple hydrotherapy treatments have been used for centuries and can be greatly relieving. And being lichen sclerosis, I would suggest going on the antifungal diet to eliminate the fungus from the body. If you had a 34-year-old, if you had 3/4 of your colon and 12 inches of your intestine removed, I'm so sorry to hear that. One lady told me that. She said they've been amputated. I guess that was. What would your diet consist of? Because now having chronic diarrhea and cramping, I'm so sorry to hear that. What I would do is put castor oil compress on the abdomen. Castor oil penetrates very, very deep, because what that lady would have now is scar tissue, and sometimes the scar tissue can build up and cause its own pain. But castor oil penetrates deep and can soften that. And I would also take the slippery elm. I talked about slippery elm in the last lecture. It coats, soothes and heals the lining of the gut and can certainly heal heal and stop diarrhea. But the person that wrote this, you have to listen very carefully. There are some foods that would sit well, there are some foods that wouldn't. So making a diary and writing down what meals, start with just vegetable soup. Does that sit well? Well, you've got a tick. And then you start to add little bits more, and little by little you'll be able to determine what foods work and what foods don't. Swelling of the stomach, bleeding at times. I think that if that person would go on to what I talked about for the irritable bowel treatment, stopping those certain foods and taking the Slippery-Elm would help. How to heal and keep away gout. In my books, there's a chapter on arthritis and gout where I talk about bringing a more alkaline condition into the body, and on Friday night we're going to be talking about inflammation, and gout certainly is a condition of inflammation. And grated ginger compresses or poultices on the gout joints can pull the inflammation out. And in my book, Sustain Me, there's a chapter on poultices where I show how to make them. How to heal from epilepsy. I always question, when did it begin? Because something has caused that. Damage to the nerve cells. Sometimes it can be from a fall, an accident, or sometimes it can be from vaccines, because vaccines do contain neurotoxins. And in the book, Stop Alzheimer's Now, he also talks about epilepsy and how the ketogenic diet can help. It's in the 1920s the ketogenic diet was first used to control epilepsy. So I'd suggest getting the book by Dr. Bruce Fife, Stop Alzheimer's Now. What are your thoughts on ivermectin? I don't use drugs and I don't agree with drug therapy, and ivermectin is a drug. So I don't advise it or use it. What recommendations do you have for teeth grinding? Well, I would suggest seeing an osteopath. They're very good at massaging, and also maybe manipulation may be needed on the TMJ joint here. That may be causing it. And often mouth guards, you can get mouth guards made out of silicone to protect the teeth if there's grinding. What causes or remedies do you have for dizziness? Well, once again, in case of illness, in fact, in the little book Ministry of Healing, in the chapter The Physician, the Educator, she has this formula for any problem in the body. She says, in case of sickness, ascertain the cause. So I'd have a look at when did the dizziness begin. Sometimes it can be blockage of the eustachian tubes, because your eustachian tubes are connecting your ears and your eyes and your nose and your mouth, so they're all connected. And in my book, Sustain Me, I have a chapter on the ears, where I look at dizziness and many ears disease, so different things in that area. So I would suggest looking at that. What are your thoughts on root canals being the cause of most diseases? I would not say that they were the cause of most diseases, but I think they probably are a big contributing factor to many diseases. Because when you have a root canal in your mouth, you've now got a dead tooth. And every tooth has a connection to different parts of the body, and sometimes a root canal in a certain area can be a contributing factor to a problem in its connection to the body. My suggestion is, if someone has a root canal, to find a biological dentist and get it removed. How would you handle treating a 10-year-old boy with dyslexia and ADHD? In his book, Dr. Bruce Fife's book, Stop Autism Now, his book is not just about autism, it's about attention deficit syndrome and hyperactivity and epilepsy in children. And he shows how eliminating the foods that I talked about in the last lecture, eliminating the dairy and the wheat and the peanuts and the oats, getting the carbohydrates down, going to a plant-based ketogenic diet is very much what we talked about here. Get the carbohydrates down, high fibre, generous protein, great fats. And Bruce Fife talks about supplementing with coconut oil, because coconut oil is able to help heal the nerve cells. And one of the best things for dyslexic children is ADHD is trampolines, because the trampoline helps to bring brain balance. But often dyslexic are excellent at music, excellent balance, excellent at things with their hands. What do you think is the best sweetener? Stevia is a good one. Some people say, I don't like stevia, it's bitter. I said, aha, you've used too much. So just use a little bit. Coconut sugar is just the crystallised nectar from the palm flower, so it's an unrefined sugar. Maple syrup and honey, they're both good sweeteners. Are mushrooms acceptable to consume since they are a fungus? I think if someone's got a fungal problem, they're best keeping away from mushrooms till they conquer it, but I think that mushrooms can be used now and then. Liver cleanse, good or bad? Depends on the liver cleanse, but there's a liver cleanse in my book, in both my books, which is quite a gentle liver cleanse and is very effective. Calcium for bones. Bones aren't made of calcium. Did you know that? They're made of 64 minerals and 12 main minerals. So what do bones need? Not calcium. Bones need minerals. And in my book, Sustain Me, I pursue that in detail in a chapter called Building Better Bones. Is it safe to keep our diaper change bin in an airtight special container in the baby room? I think if it's an airtight container, I don't see a problem. But it'd be nice to change it every day. Mammograms are radiation, and radiation cause cancer? Quite possibly. Are mammograms a good idea, or is thermography, which costs about $250, which is hard in insurance? Well, don't have anything. I don't. I thought it said, is marriage useful? Is moringa useful? I think moringa can have a tonic effect on the body. There's no doubt about that. Do you know, I was reading one lady's description of mammogram. She said the lady takes her top off, she lies her breast down on the highway and a semi-trailer runs over it. Dr. Lorraine Day was an orthopaedic surgeon in, I think, about the 80s, 90s in San Francisco Hospital and got breast cancer, and she chose to conquer it naturally, and she had all statistics of how many mammograms actually can contribute to breast cancer. So I do not advise mammograms, and they say you should never say never, but I would never have one. So thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to seeing you tomorrow night.